Happy days, tube days. Today it's the ModWright LS99 preamp. I'm doing a series. I have a whole ModWright system right now. It's got the PH 9.0 XT variant phono stage up front. This is the LS99 balanced preamp in the middle, and then the KWA 99 mono block power amps. So just doing this guy for today. I'll do follow-up videos on the other guys. If you watch the channel, you might know ModWright from the CXN V2 tube modded DAC streamer thing I reviewed a little while back. Been pretty interested in the ModWright brand as it's progressed. Dan Wright, very nice guy, lots of interviews. You can go find out the whole backstory, but the long and short of it was started out modding electronics, adding analog output stages, etc., and eventually has built a brand with a full line of products, often but not exclusively featuring tube designs and typologies. This is sort of the miniaturized or slimmed down version of the LS300, which is their flagship preamp. This is part of what I think Dan calls like the 9 series, which is the PH9, the LS99, the KWA 99. So we're full 9 series here. This guy is a balanced unit. It's not dual mono like the LS300, but it is a fully balanced unit. Lots of I/O. You've got 2 sets of balanced in. You've got multiple sets of RCA in, and then you've got lots of outputs, which gives you a ton of flexibility. You'll notice there's a little power connector here. There's an external power supply we'll talk about in a minute. It's also got these 12-volt triggers, which is great because these will trigger the mono block, so that makes life very convenient. Around front, 2 big shiny knobs. One is your input selector, clicky, very nice, and the other is a very smooth and enjoyable volume knob that is also remote controlled. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. Got these nice switchy, clicky switches, if those make you happy, and it's got a home theater bypass. You've got a physical mute, which is pretty handy. Power, phase inversion, and then, yeah, like I said, you've got these 4 different inputs and then the bypass. So, super cool. And then there's tubes poking out of this thing. There's a pair of 6922 output tubes, and then this is the Rectifier, which is like in the class of 5A R4s or GZ34s. And if you've, again, follow the channel, you know that I think tube rectification is awesome in terms of being able to sculpt the sound, much as output or input tubes help, or power tubes. Being that this sits in the middle of your system as a preamp, and I was talking about this a little bit with the Manly stuff, you know, preamps in many ways, I think, really determine a lot of the character of your system, whether they are incredibly neutral and add sort of no flavor, or whether they are adding warmth or spaciousness or any sort of characteristic that you're looking for. So I'm a big believer in a great preamp as a key input to having a great ultimate sound. Okay, I got to do a little bit of griping though right off the bat, which is this remote, which is cheap feeling and terrible. And not sure why this decision was made. Lots of these buttons are not used. You know, power, for instance, is not used. You must physically turn it on. But the trigger for the 12-volt triggers to turn on the attached amps is this button, which like is way too close to the volume button, which is up and down here. And like sometimes my brain goes, oh, volume's left and right. Anyway, I hit that thing and turn off the amps all the time. Drives me batty. Having mute on the remote's awesome. It's funny though, it'll turn on the mute light, but it won't obviously physically flick the switch, so you can sort of have this weird scenario where the mute switch is off on the unit because it's muted from the remote. So that's like a little wacky as well. And then like the IR range is just unforgiving. Like, you really have to get this thing pointed and dialed in perfectly. Things I do like about this remote is changing the volume is actually really smooth. It's not jumpy. That you can really nuance. I have very sensitive speakers hooked up to this system, and with those amps, there's just I have more power than I know what to do with. So having subtlety in the volume is very much appreciated. Okay, gripe concluded. The rest of this will be pretty glowing and positive. Oh, colorways. You can get a silver faceplate or a black faceplate. Typically, those come with matching knobs. This one I got special ordered with the silver on black. It looks really cool. Nice contrast. I bet you could probably reach out to the fine folks at ModWright and order a set of contrasty knobs if you wanted to. I'm not promising anything, but these are held on by, I believe, grub screws, so I assume it would be a pretty easy swap out. Anyway, I think it looks pretty sharp overall. The size is really nice. Like, I don't have a super dedicated rack for everything. Like, I have to work within my world, within the media unit in my family home, and so not like having a smaller unit is great. And here's why it's small. It's because this giant toroidal transformer that's sitting out here in its own box is separated, and that's not just a packaging design, obviously, to make this thing smaller. That's also in service of making this as quiet as possible, right? Tubes can be great at picking up on RF and amplifying that RF. And what I will say, what I did find is in my experience, you don't want to sit these things right next to each other on a rack. Like, if you're like, oh, like this will look, cute, have them right next to each other. That doesn't work terribly well because toroidal transformers, they radiate their RF in the horizontal plane in which they're oriented. So if you move these things on top of each other, like if you have a shelf above, great, no noise. If you have it sitting right next to it, it's very likely your tubes are going to pick up on that RF. So it's just a little placement note to think about. It comes with a nice flexible umbilical that's, 3-ish, 4-ish feet long, so plenty of room to move it where you need it to be. So I was moving from the Manly Jumbo Shrimp as my pre to this, and in many ways these are both tube preamps, and so both made by American manufacturers. You're thinking, no, those would be some commonality. I feel like they actually couldn't really be further apart from each other. Well, that's too much, but they are very differentiated. I also had another tube pre on loan that I was able to test with, and then a solid state pre as well. And for me, this thing just strikes the perfect balance of giving you all the depth and detail and clarity that you could possibly want out of a unit. It feels like you're not sacrificing any transparency by having this in, and all you're doing is gaining the ability to craft and shape the tonal presentation with the tube complement, which I think is really huge, right? Often I've recognized, even with very nice tube gear, that there is a little bit of a trade-off you make between pulling every bit of nuance and detail out of a recording versus getting some of that the spatial qualities that tubes can impart, some of that warmth, some of that fluidity. You do often sort of have to find a compromise, and this really doesn't ask you to compromise very much. It doesn't feel like tube gear, and it especially with the stock tubes, I think it's very, very, very clean, and maybe cleaner than I like, which is why I ended up going a different direction. It's not as full-bodied right off the bat out of the box as something like the Jumbo Shrimp would be if you're looking for that sort of more romantic, kind of fuller sort of presentation, maybe, a hint of sort of that vintage sound you might be looking for from older tube pieces. You're not going to find that here. This is definitely more of a hi-fi sort of piece. But that being said, once you do start tube rolling, you can really shape that a lot. Even just popping in some, new production gold lines Immediately I was like, yes, yes. Some, listen to some Pink Floyd, hearing some, twanginess in guitar, hearing like vocals start to really expand and have a bunch of additional nuance. So yeah, I won't go crazy into every different tube I tried. I can link to the ModWright CXN review I did, where I actually went very specifically into the common characteristics of different sort of brands or ilks of the 6922 family. What I ended up with after trying all the things that I go through in that video is some 6DJ8s from Holland made for Amprix. Are they Amprix branded? They might be Philips branded. Anyway, they're pinch weights, D-getters, and what they're sort of known for is having a sweetness and a very low noise floor, very quiet tube, which I will say is important for this amp, because even with, if you have sensitive speakers downstream and you're using a relatively powerful set of amps like I am, the KWA-99s, which are 100 watt per channel, you will transfer that noise downstream if you're not using a very quiet pair of 6922s. If you're not using a super efficient speaker, this is probably not an issue for you. But for me, I needed something super quiet, and those really fit the bill. Here, I can pop one out. You can take this off. It's not a ton of screws, so if this is a little nerve-wracking putting screws in and out, or putting tubes in and out with just this little it's actually even more exciting because this is a pretty fat bottle rectifier. You can also just take the metal off, but then you have to put the metal back on top of the tube. So anyway, it's your whatever your risk profile is. And then on the rectifier side, I ended up with Western Electric 422A, which is a very, very nice rectifier. Pretty hard to find and pretty expensive these days, unfortunately. I got mine a while ago and have tried it in a bunch of systems, and here again it was just like, oh. But tried a bunch of, the good news is there's like a ton of new production rectifiers in the family that would be applicable. So you can, and these are not expensive, in the $30 to $50 price range. So you can experiment, play around, and see what tube rectification does for the overall sound. Usually, in my experience, you're going to sort of be pushing the fullness around. You're going to be pushing the sort of speed around a bit, how tight and articulate things are, especially in like the bass region is where I pick up a lot on how rectifiers change the presentation. So anyway, big fan of this thing overall, very happy with it. I've been listening to it for 6 months now, and I haven't had any desire to move to something new, which is very, very, very rare for me. So the complete system together is just killer, and I will talk more about the other pieces in upcoming videos, so definitely subscribe and pay attention if you're interested in hearing about that. Yeah, but for now, that's Sidecraft, signing out.